So now that you know how to cut and shape or form contours of wire and create, different manipulations of the material, I want to show you how to connect it together to create different forms. So the first connection I want to show you is, I think, the easiest, but also kind of the worst, is this twist connection. So you literally just I'm going to take the 19 gauge wire. Um, you literally just take the wire and then you create an X with it. Put the pliers right at that X and then you twist it, and then you can twist up. Um, twist got kind of out of sync, but you get the idea. And then cut off the excess. And whenever you cut your wire, you always want to point it towards the table. So it's not flying around, because you'd be surprised how airborne wire can get. So I have, you can make all of these loops, and then you could connect those together, and I'll show you another connection that you can use. Or you could, because you have like this kind of tail you have to deal with. So you can use that as part of your design, which I suggest doing. Or you could kind of tuck it off to the side. But understand, with wire, all of your connections are visible. So wire is a open structure when you work with wire, and so you can't hide any of these moments. And it always creates, whenever you have a connection, it always creates a denser line weight that you have to deal with. So you do want to make that kind of part of your design and not think that this will be ignorable or invisible, because you can have the most beautifully sculpted piece, but if your connections are a mess, then it ruins everything. So make sure that it's kind of just like seeing glue. Just make sure that you're considering that with your design. But this sort of twist connection, oops, that is not facing you, sorry. The twist connection is the kind of easiest, but also the most problematic. Oh, another thing I forgot to mention is with this twist technique, you can actually over twist it and then break the wire. So as I said in the previous demo, you can actually kind of keep working the material so it starts to break down, and it will actually break apart. And it's really easy to break your wire when you're doing the twist connection if you're not paying attention. I'll save that for last. The next connection that I'm going to talk about is like kind of the hooks, making two hooks together. And notice I don't have ends sticking out. This is a connection that people tend to always want to do. It works, I think, best with the smaller gauge wires. I'm going to show you with this gauge just because it's the most visible. But basically, you can make it fairly tight, but it will always slip around. It's really difficult to get it so there's absolutely no space for it to move. And you'll see with other examples, the more connections you have on your piece, the more stable your wire becomes. So it might still slip around and move, but if you have other connections, that kind of starts to anchor all of that down for you. So let's make ourselves, actually, I'll just hook this onto here. So you want to put your pliers at the end to prepare for it. So you don't even want to like put them together first, because that's kind of pointless. You want to put your pliers at the end, and then I'm creating enough space to slide my other wire in, but I'm also making sure that it's not perpendicular to the kind of mother wire. that when I loop around, it won't hit this wire. I want it to be able to go past that wire so I can really tighten it around. It's better to tighten this connection by coiling the wire around versus trying to like clamp down on your loop, because that never totally works, and it often creates more moments of slippage. So kind of move my pliers throughout the piece, and I pinch down on this connection so that it really winds around, so that this kind of keeps going past that, like past itself. So it really is a secure connection. And then I can sort of straighten everything back out after I have it the way I want. So I don't recommend this for the thickest gauge wire. It tends to be more difficult. I'm even struggling with it a little bit. So this, you might have noticed, probably not, but this is what Calder used for a lot of his connections, especially on the puppets. So there's that. So now I have two of these, but you can see they still move, even though I tightened them down as best as I could. But say, there goes my wire. Say you want to make a sphere. All of you want to make spheres all the time. So say you want to make a rounded shape. It could even, this doesn't have to be a sphere. It could be a teardrop shape. It could kind of come in and come back out again. And these wires can be as long or as short as you want. But one method to create that is to connect wires all the same length wire, the same length wire all in the center, and then one at a time sort of work with the wire across from the other one. So one section at a time. You don't want to bring them all up in the middle and have a bunch of stuff in your way. I have the advantage of having two pliers. I can do that same method of looping the wire, and I'm actually going to turn one off to the side so then I can hook them around and then tighten them down on themselves. And I'm doing the exact same thing I just did with that larger wire. You can see how much easier this is and how much less work I'm having to do with my hands. I know it's very difficult to actually see what I'm doing, but hopefully you get a sort of sense. And then I could just keep bringing these elements up to the center, and notice things kind of shift around, and I go with that. I try not to fight that too much. Some people get really frustrated and like to tape things down as they work. So this is fighting me. Just want to show you a couple more. This is wire sculpture in real time. Here we go. Oh my God. Ugh, come on, friend. All right, finally. Okay. So like if I wanted to tape this together so it would stop shifting around on me, I could. And I would definitely go back in and reshape um, my curves once everything's stabilized. But currently, it's just shifting around so much, I don't want to try to I'm going to keep that take where I was really struggling, because what happened was I actually made my loop too short, and so it just like would not wrap enough to stay in the same spot. So I'm gonna, just like pretend that I have all of these up in the center, and then you can, if like say things are still kind of slipping and you want this connection to match the one at the bottom, and I'm going to sort of also show you how I did the one at the bottom. So this is a situation where if I kept twisting, I could very easily just break this wire. But what I did at the bottom, use longer pliers, I need more leverage, was I actually took the piece of 12 gauge, 22 gauge, we don't even have 12 gauge wire, 22 gauge wire, and I wrapped it around almost like I was kind of lashing all the parts together. So if I had, all of these up, I would kind of go like weave it between those points. And it makes this sort of messy ball, but I can use that, like you always kind of want to mirror what you have throughout your piece, which is sort of what I have at the bottom. And then if I feel like before I finish, like it's done, I can cut a little end, the little end off. And then I would only do that after I was completely finished, but I didn't want to waste a lot of time making you watch me do the same motion over and over again. So, so we have the hook joints, we have, where you're kind of lashing or weaving the wire throughout. That's another form of wire connections. And then the last one I'm going to talk to you about is my favorite, I think, which is when you have two wires overlapping like this, and it doesn't have to be a circle shape. It can be any shape. Two wires overlapping. I would have it in a continuous shape, not just like two loose wires overlapping. And you can, although maybe you'd prove me wrong on that, and then you can wrap the thinner wire around that. So you can see I have an overlap that's about 1/2 inch right here. I'm going to take my thin wire, my thinnest gauge wire, which is the 22 gauge, and I'm going to wrap that around. And I started off just using my hands. And I try to wrap it as tightly as possible. And I want to make sure, especially with the thicker gauge wire, that I really losing my train of thought, sorry, that I really have my shape as close to what I want as possible. You can't always go back in and reshape after everything's secure, but especially with the 12 gauge, you can mess up your connection if you move things around too much after. So this method works really well. They actually use it a lot in hat making and millinery, but it's not perfect, and it's still wire, so it'll still kind of move on you. And I'm going to use my pliers to finish that off. But notice I use my pliers to actually hold all of this in place to have a clean way of wrapping it around. And I squish it all together to know how much more I need to do. So I never cut it off before I gather the wire. And I just put the pliers on either end and kind of tighten that coil. And if you're lucky enough to have two pliers, you can use them as extensions of your hands kind of like Edward Scissorhands. And I made this a little short, but I think that's okay. So you can see how well this is pretty secure. But if I mess with this form too much, this will start to loosen up. And the way I made this form, and just to kind of demonstrate how one connection is too loose, but many, many, many connections, like this is much more secure. This is becoming secure, but the more I connect things together, the better it will be. And so I'm doing a sort of free form of lots of pieces together here. And I'll start to figure out, I'm kind of been just doing this with all my demo trials. You can see this one already slipped out of its thing. But and then I would just lash or wrap the wire, not lash, wrap the wire around where I want it to connect. And I do strategically place these where the connection happens. So they're kind of bulky, but it's better than like having them just everywhere floating around. Like I make sure that this moment happens only where the different wires are coming together. And I could definitely tape one of these parts in place to stabilize as I'm wrapping the other part. I think you get enough of an idea of how to do that, then I'm not going to demonstrate that demonstrate putting these parts together. It's exactly the same as this, it's just putting two together and wrapping around. You can also kind of float the rings away from one another and do sort of what I did with this, where you connect, you know, wire to one and then you sort of loop it around or lash it, connecting to other ones, sort of floating away. Be warned, this is a very frustrating technique, and I'm not even going to demonstrate it for this video, but it's definitely something you can do. So like making multiple parts, there's many ways that you can sort of mix and match these connections and techniques to build your forms that way. So so there's that. And then the last one I want to show you is making, second to last, almost forgot about this one. So this is, I just said not to put lots of wires together with this connection that are loose and not a full form, but you can kind of connect them in the middle and do similar to Ruth Asawa's pieces, where she had the wire kind of wrapped and then would kind of coil it again at different line weights and start to break it apart. I'm not going to demonstrate it, but I think you can kind of get the idea. Like I could wrap it there and then have it, so like have it branch apart. And I could have many more wires coming off of this as well to start to build a form that way. So you can see how this would be like a very clean starting point to create a form that's like maybe branches or nerves or roots, something of that nature that, you know, is sort of starts with like a stem kind of form and then breaks down into thinner and thinner line weights. So that was the second to last. The final one I want to show you is this one, where I did a little mini version in the first demo where I had these petals, and then I actually made the sort of central form this way and then put another one, attached another wire to that, and then built out from there. So then I could create these. And I start out, before I shape the petals, they're not really, before I start to make more irregular contours on those forms, I just make a general loop just to kind of get things in place. And then I shape them and sculpt them after I secure everything in place. So I secured all this down so that you could see in the video So you wouldn't have to watch me build up this whole shape. But you can see, and I'm going to connect just one so you can sort of see how it goes. And I'm going to connect this one. So I kind of go down the line and, I'll start with one and then move around. And then I could keep building off of that if I want. I can add stuff to the, further up in these petals or petal-like moments, or I could have something come off of this end. But you can see like all the connections are highly visible. And so you really, really want to make sure that they are well crafted. So one thing about this method with the one line is I have to kind of loop it around every time it hits the bottom. So I get this place to put my wire and secure everything. Hoping I'm staying on camera. I definitely recognize that I have to work on that. So we've got this, got these things tucking together, and then I go through with my far too long wire and I very tightly wrap that around. And I kind of get started on it just with my hands. The thin wire, I don't have to use the pliers quite as often. I use the pliers to kind of start to hold things together the further along I get, and also to kind of clean up my connection. So I always want to make sure that I'm coiling in succession. So I'm always, lining up my coils next to one another. So I'm not like kind of crisscrossing and overlapping because that looks really poor. And then you could even, like if you want to build a skin, you can kind of do that this way. I'm not demonstrating those techniques because I want you to sort of be inventive with that for yourself, but you can use a lot of what I'm doing to approach that part of this exercise. So what you are expected to do is tackle all of these different, you only need to try 3, but they're kind of all interchangeable. These 2, I guess, are interchangeable. Tackle these different connection points because I want you to sort of get to know the material and get to know different ways that you can use it and see what works for you before you approach a larger, kind of more final object. And create 3 different objects using those techniques, playing with contour, playing with shape, using one continuous line to put something together, using multiple parts to put something together. So I want you to try as many different techniques as you can in 3 different objects so that you can get a handle of the material. So now that this is secured down, I can then I can go back in and start to kind of shape these irregular shapes. It's starting to look a lot like my paper sculpture demo elements. And I can fold parts in and then fold other parts outward. But I wouldn't really want to do that until I secure everything down because otherwise it kind of just starts to slip around on you and it's really difficult to manage. So yeah, I look forward to seeing how you use all of these techniques for yourself.